your father gave you money and like you lost it completely. How did this change your journey? Like, because you could identify, and when people around you were ignoring this stock, I think you mentioned it was available at 30 crores valuation. So how did that
And
this
just to
change?
remind you, for 30 crores, even at that time, you could barely buy a flat in South Bombay.
Oh.
30 crores was not, it was just throwing it away basically. People didn't understand that
Yes.
business. They were throwing it away. You could have bought, I could have bought, 10% of CMC for 3 crore rupees. You probably couldn't get a flat in South Bombay for that much money at that
Okay.
time. It was that cheap.
So how did this change your journey? Because holding onto a stock that has become 100 bagger, 200 bagger, how did this change you, and what, like, your dad perception about you? Like, how did that change?
Well, they say the only mistakes in life that are not worth it are the ones that you don't learn anything from. And I learned a lot from the mistakes I made in the
Yes.
early years. And I was always very interested in reading. So I had already read about
Yeah.
Buffett and thought about long-term compounding and these things. And there's a very interesting discussion that in the 90s I had with my father, who had been in the market for 20 years and
Yes.
was a very astute investor, but he was fishing in a smaller pond. The pond grew measurably when I was
Yes.
in the market. And we had been lucky enough to buy Infosys and we were lucky enough to buy
Yes.
CMC. And at some point, my father, when we doubled or tripled our money, he said, we should take our money off the
Okay.
table and sell those stocks out there. And it didn't make much sense to me. So I said, why should we sell it? He said, book your profit. Trees don't go to the sky. And then I said, then what do you do? Book your profit, you'll pay the taxes that are due. And then I said, what do you do? Then you find other ideas. And with the ideas, I said, what if the other idea is still Infosys and CMC?
Yes.
Why should I look for other stock? He said, that doesn't happen. Stocks don't go. But because of my education background, because of looking at global markets, I understood that sometimes stocks multiply for years of time. A good business doesn't become bad because its price has gone up 2 times or
Yeah.
3 times. I think that helped me a lot in trying to understand that the value of a business compounds over long periods of time, and that a good business remains a good business for 10, 20, 30 years sometimes even for 50 years. And I think that was, if you ask me, that each generation has to bring something to the
Yes.
table. My father bought the basic skills of the stock market. I kind of extended to make long-term wealth through compounding.
That's a great story. Now, talking of long-term wealth, I read in one of your interviews, or like I think listened to it, you mentioned about Lottie Marcus, and that's a very unheard story of compounding. I would like that if you can elaborate more on that, because when I listened to it, I was literally amazed, like how they grew wealth over so many years.
It's a great story, Sourabh. I'm glad you brought it out. I'd love to share it with you. I think I forget the name of the 2 principals, but they named Marcus, Lottie and his wife.
Yeah.
And his wife first was immigration from Hungary, and she came to America as a Jewish refugee, and she started working for Benjamin Graham, who's the father of, intellectual father of Warren Buffett, if you will. But, Graham was a great stock picker. He was a bit of a ladies' man. He kind of hit on her, and she didn't kind of like that. So they remained friends, but she then went and married this other refugee from the old world. And he was a dentist and she was a secretary. But they remained friends. Benjamin Graham and the Marcus remained friends. And she invested money according to what Benjamin Graham said. And then when Benjamin Graham was almost about to retire, he said, go follow this other person, he'll help you. And they followed that. And they lived always below their means, always below their means, and kept investing in good businesses, good whatever. And then they turned about 75 few years back, 5, 10 years back. They were 75, 80 years old, and they said, well, what do we do with the money we have out there? And so they decided to make a contribution to the Israeli Negev University for water. They believe that a lot of the wars in the Middle East are because of water. And if that can be used to help, they would do that. Surprisingly, over 30, 40 years of straight investing, that wealth had become about $200, $225 million US. This is a dentist and a bookkeeper who had done nothing in life, lived below the means and invested the money, and that few $100,000 had become $200 million plus. So they drew up the papers to give the money to the Negev University. And yet by the time they finished drawing up the papers, there was a bull market and the wealth had gone from $225 million to $300 million now. So they gave up $300 million. But the important part of the story, which I always tell my son and anyone who will listen to me, is that when they flew down to make, and that was the largest single contribution ever made to Israel by a private person, $300 million to Negev University, Lottie Marcus and his wife uh, flew to Tel Aviv in economy class. They were making a $300 million donation, and yet they were so careful with the money that they flew economy class to Maiden. And that really made me understand the concept that sometimes you have to be trustees for wealth,
Yes.
that this game you keep score with through money. But it's so important that we are so blessed that we also have the ability to give back and to share our wisdom and share our fortune with someone perhaps a little bit less fortunate. So I was very impressed with that story.
Oh, that's an amazing story. Now, talking of philanthropy, you have had a great career, you have made your wealth. Uh, what kind of legacy do you want to leave behind, and what kind of philanthropy activities have you planned in your mind?
I've only started in a very limited sense, so that's bad in the sense that I think I'm catching in years. I should be doing more. We have given individually to some universities, education, whatever. But I hope in the next 5-7 years it will be more pronounced. See, Sourabh, you must understand that there was a cohort of people who were called the Midnight Children, people born after 1947.
Yes.
When the clock struck midnight and India became free, as they say, we had a tryst with destiny. I was born in 1957, which was at the end of the Midnight Children
Yes.
band, if you will, out there. But in many ways, my generation born in the 50s was what we call the blessed generation out of India.
Yes.
Because we came of age in the 80s. What happened in the 80s? The Berlin Wall fell, liberalization happened,
Yes.
the globalization took off, China entered WTO. All the tailwinds that were missing for the last 20, 30 years in India's economic development took place in the span of the next 10, 15 years when we were there. When I came, as I never get tired of telling people, the index was 800. Today it's closer to 80,000.
Yes.
You made 100 times just by being in the index. So in that sense, we were a very blessed generation. And I think we have an obligation, and I'm really impressed to say my friends Motilal Oswal, donate very liberally to education. Two stock market friends have built two of the finest universities in India.
Yes.
One in Delhi called Ashoka University, one in Pune called Flame
Flame.
University. A lot of them are giving back very generously of their time, of their money, and I would be remiss if I didn't do that. So I hope in the next 5-10 years of my life I'll be more prone to doing the works or giving where I believe it will be well spent.
Okay, now drawing back to, we're talking about money. When we met, you mentioned that my friends are billionaire and I am not, and that's one regret you mentioned 12 years ago. I was watching your podcast, one of your podcasts last week, and you mentioned that same statement. So wealth after a point doesn't, you cannot be satisfied beyond money, right? Like you can have 100 crores, 200 crores, 500 crores. There's no end to it. So I want to know your thoughts on money, and why do you say that basically your friends are billionaire and you are not, and you regret that?
See, Saurabh, it's very funny. You made a number of points there. Do I have the financial freedom? Yes, of course I do. I think anyone in the market who's done successfully has financial freedom under there. But how do you measure yourself? Okay, if you are, say, making movies, did you win an Oscar? Did you win an Emmy? You can measure yourself. If you're a great mathematician, did you win the Fields Prize? If you're great in architecture, did you win the Pritzker Prize? I mean, there are ways you can measure it. In the stock market, there's no way to measure it other than the wealth, other than the zeros in your bank account. Okay, so whether you do with the money is not important, but you should be measured by money, and that's the way it should be out there. And I regret the fact, not because I feel envious of them, not because I need more money. I have a comfortable life, thank you very much. But I realize that within me burns a desire to be the best in the business. And the best of the business is measured by, with the zeros you have. There are 4,000 billionaires in the world. I think 90% of them have got there because they put money into stocks at some point, not in land, not in labor, not in agriculture, whatever. It's because they hold big blocks of common stock. And, I think what limited me was my own lack of foresight, ambition. I don't want to blame anybody else. It was my own mistake. And I regret that fact that, I could not break out of the straitjacket that I'd imposed on myself. My friends did, and I think more power to them. I regret that. And it's not, believe me, and I mean that with all humility, it has nothing to do with the money. And it's not that I'm going to live any differently than I live right now with more money. But it's a point to prove to myself. I think I want to be a malcontent. I don't want to be happy about it. You know, you can always be happy in life,
Yes.
whatever. But, you know, I think it's the malcontents that build the pyramids in Egypt, or build the Taj Mahal, or build, you know, the Golden Gate Bridge, or whatever. You know, you have to strive. You know, I think it's almost a sin not to use God-given talent to the best possible use.
That's a great perspective, like being the best at what you do. But I don't like I would agree that you are one of the best investors we have.
I mean, that's very kind of you, but the best is measured by dollar terms. Now, you can take that money and do what you want with it. I have no issue about it. You can give it all to charity. You can build the Taj Mahal. That's fine with me. But in order to come to the short list, you need to measure yourself by that. And it's not how you spend it that's important. It's that you made it legitimately. Of course, it all has to be legitimate. And like I said, I was part of the blessed generation. We had that opportunity. If I didn't have the opportunity, I wouldn't be complaining.
Yes.
Did I live up to my potential? I don't think I did. But did I have the opportunity? There was the potential there in my career? Of course it was there.